Okay, welcome to part 2 on the PT1911 conversion from 38 Super to 10mm. As you can see, we have the 1911 broken down into its basic components. This is the barrel for the 38 Super, this is the 10mm auto. What we're using here is we're actually using a 2-piece guide rod with a buffer system with a progressive 23-pound spring. So when you're looking for components, make sure that you get at least a 20-pound spring, preferably a 23-pound progressive spring. We'll explain that a little later. And opt for the full-length guide rod. And what I'm actually using here is I'm using a little buffer. I'll explain the reason for the buffer. When you get into the 10mm caliber, there's an extremely large amount of pressure in the recoil. And oftentimes in 10mm there's damage on the slide in this area right here. Normally there's damage right here and there's damage right here. What the actual buffer does is the buffer goes into this location here and it prevents metal on metal damage. The frame and the slide will never meet. They will be buffered by the material in this area right here. There's been a lot of controversy on the internet over buffers, and it all has to do with an individual who left a buffer in their firearm for approximately 7 years to the point where the material started to degrade. And what happens in the buffer is once the material starts to degrade, you can actually take it and peel it off, and it comes off in little chunks. Apparently what happened was that as he discharged his firearm, it got caught somehow in the mechanism and caused some serious damage. It's really a shame that a product receives bad reviews because of the incompetence of the user. So if you take care of your buffers, you check your firearm at least once a week, you're not going to have a problem with the buffer system. If you leave the buffer in your firearm for 6, 7, 8 months, 2 years without checking it, I guess I'll just refrain at this point from making a comment. Just make sure that your weapons are cared for, that they're properly maintained, and that if you're using a buffer, be smart about it, use it right, use it correctly. It's an excellent product and it protects your firearm when used properly. Now the reason that we're using the 2-stage spring, or what they call a progressive spring, is quite simple. This particular spring that I have in this 10mm conversion starts off at about 16.2 pounds. That's enough energy to keep the barrel locked into the slide throughout the duration of the projectile traveling the length of the barrel and exiting the muzzle. It'll progressively increase the poundage as the slide goes back to approximately 23.2 pounds, where it will actually then fly forward, chambering an additional round into the cylinder. The nice thing about the progressive spring is as it travels back, it actually retards the backward movement, slowing it down so that the impact between the slide and between the frame is minimal. It's kind of a nice little setup. It works very well. The reason I'm using a full-length rod is because the stubby rods are deficient in several different categories. I'll just go over the most significant one. You can identify the stubby rod system by looking at the guide face. You'll notice that the guide face is solid and it has a checker pattern where the actual guide rod will never exit the actual bushing. It'll actually stay inside the bushing, compressing the spring in this section here. The problem with that, and I'll go ahead and exaggerate it, is that as the slide moves back and forth and it actually sits in this area is where the spring and the guide are, it tends to bend, and when it bends it changes the poundage and the progression of the spring. So there's not a consistent and smooth transaction between the chambering and the firing of the rounds. What the full-length rod does is it contains that spring throughout the entire duration so that there is a smooth transition without any bending whatsoever, changing in the progression or the poundage of the spring. It's an excellent system. It works quite well. So be smart when you select your rod. Make sure it's a full-size rod. Make sure it's at least a 23-pound progressive spring, and you should be just fine. Now the barrels that I selected, I'll tell you a little bit more about the manufacturer later, but this is my 10mm barrel. You'll recognize it right away as you look at 10mm. A lot of individuals who know where the products are, know the manufacturers, knows just by looking at this who makes it. They've been making barrels for a long time, and they're very reliable. One of the crucial points in the conversion is the actual fit. Make sure that the fit is absolutely perfect, that it locks in place, that everything is absolutely smooth, and you're going to have a good start to the project. I would highly recommend that for the fitting of the barrel to the slide that you utilize a qualified gunsmith. This is not a job for an individual who looks at a video and then suddenly believes he's an expert. It's very dangerous. It has to be absolutely precise. You have to know exactly what you're doing. You have to know the actual tolerances involved, and it has to be done right the first time. You do it right, you do it once, you do it wrong, things will explode. So a professional gunsmith should be the one that takes your barrel and matches it to your slide. The area in question is right here. This is where the 10mm and the 38mm differ, other than the obvious being different calibers. There has to be machining work done from point A all the way around to point B, along with the surface area right here. You want to make sure that when everything is said and done, that it is absolutely perfectly matched. And there's a gauge that you can use, and machinists know this, to match, to make sure that that is in fact perfect. That's a very crucial measurement, and it has to be precise. Also, when you match the face here and here with the frame, there are exacting specifications that have to be met, and there are tolerances that have to be met. It is not a job for an individual who is not qualified. So again, get a gunsmith to match the barrel with the slide. I am intentionally leaving out those specifications and that procedure because I do not want anyone getting hurt. This is not where you want to experiment. What you can do is you can purchase the barrel, you can purchase the actual firearm, and you can hand it to a gunsmith and ask them to do the conversion for you. The spring that you're going to need is going to be at least a 23-pound. It differs depending on personal preference, but I find that that works the best in a progressive spring with a full-length slide. So now that we have the basic components down, we're going to go ahead and show you how the actual cartridge fits into the slide. Now remember, there is 0 modifications with the 10mm cartridge going into the 38 Super slide. We talked in our previous video where Taurus did all the machining work for us. So here is a 38 Super, here is the 38 Super slide. Now as we put this in, take just a moment here, we'll notice that the fit is going to be very well because it is the 38 Super in the 38 Super slide. You'll notice that there's a little bit of play here, and that play actually works to our benefit when we put in the 10mm, because remember, Taurus machined that at 0.500, where the 10mm, the outer diameter of the casing, is 0.425. So as it actually chambers that round, it slides it in from the bottom, feeding from the magazine. And look at this, it actually goes beautifully. No modification. The ejector is where it needs to be. It guides that right into the chamber. Perfect fit all the time, every time. $400 savings at least. You do not need another slide for this conversion. You simply use the 38 Super without any modifications. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put everything together that you see. Then we're going to go ahead and put a dummy round into the chamber, and I'm going to show you the ejection of the 10mm. Then we're going to go to the range tomorrow, and we're going to fire off about 50 rounds of 10mm in this gun to show you just how accurate, just how reliable, and just how powerful this conversion is.